Well, that's idiotic.
Pretty solid material you missed.
Seriously. You guys are gonna have to repeat that whole thing. Son of a bitch.
You want me to reach around from the right or the left side?
Fly back to Toronto, we can do the whole thing over again.
That's right.
Back in June, I finally managed to take a couple of my closest friends up for a flight, and we decided to make a trip out of it. Brian, Neil, and I flew down to Windsor, Ontario, mostly to do a tour of the Hiram Walker and Sons Whiskey Distillery, and also to check out the casino and just hang out. This video covers the flight down, the whiskey tour, and some of the other highlights. I hope you enjoy it. We took off on a beautiful Saturday morning for the 2-hour flight down to Windsor Airport. Unfortunately, the camera was on the wrong settings and didn't quite get all of Brian sitting in the front seat, and I didn't manage to get Neil at all in the back seat. Brian was a little nervous about flying in such a small plane, but he was a trooper. You can hardly tell he's nervous. He's so focused on taking video of the takeoff. I also managed not to turn on the cockpit audio recorder, and I missed the first 50 minutes of the flight. So I'm going to jump ahead to some of the scintillating conversation we had.
Have like pilot parties that you all get together and just kind of talk about piloting stories?
We don't really call them pilot parties. But there are like fly-ins at different airports. You know.
Captain concubines? Not better than pilot parties? Tea parties?
There will be like barbecues, get-togethers, people do at their hangars.
One of us normal people that don't fly? You're like, oh.
Guys, you're more than welcome. If you don't mind hearing about aircrafts for 2 hours.
Oshkosh, buy some overalls. Gosh.
Someday, not yet. That thing's huge though, like 300,000 people show up to that. Insane.
Waterloo traffic Thunder 202 Caravan just departed the Waterloo zone, northbound to Waterton, 4500.
I don't mind admitting to you, now that I've been up here a while, that the world is flat.
Pretty clear.
Yeah, you're never going to convince me otherwise.
You appear to be right.
How often do you have to get in trouble before they your pilot's license?
How often?
Yeah, like let's say you don't listen to. How many times do they finally save?
They generally won't like ding you for that if you just don't hear them. They'll give you a hard time.
Right.
But you have to do something pretty drastic to actually lose your pilot's license. You'd have to, I mean, you could, like, if I buzzed that town, right?
Okay.
And somebody saw me or reported me to Transport Canada, I can lose my license for that. So it's not a matter of how many times, more the severity of what you do.
Total Foxtrot Oscar Tower, identified 15 miles to the east at 4,600 feet. Cleared straight in runway 27. Just be advised there is a field with
Lane below us to the right.
Yeah, probably going in for a landing there.
Cleared straight in 27, and we'll keep an eye out for the gliders.
Where is he? You see him?
He was going actually parallel to our wing.
Oh.
Northwise.
Oh, he's on the... He must have been on base. To land, maybe?
Oh, he's behind us.
Okay.
Still traveling away from the airport.
Tango Tower, Roger, number 3, falling in Katana 2 miles.
Oh, now he's turning.
To the airport?
Yep.
Yeah, so they're following a certain altitude when they're in the traffic pattern going in for landing. So he's going to be probably 1,000 feet below us, 1,500 feet below us.
Bravo Tower, Roger, full short runway 27, landing traffic.
Hold short 27, Bravo Zulu Bravo.
Golf Tango Zulu Yankee, Lindgren.
Alright, so downtown's there. That's probably Ivy or Western up there. The three of us met about 20 years ago when we were in grad school together at the Ivy Business School in London, Ontario. London's on the way down to Windsor, so we decided we'd do a quick tour around the university.
Golf Bravo Zulu Bravo Tower, and also line up and wait runway 27.
Old Ivy building.
You don't see the new one? It's like the one with the big courtyard right there.
Yeah, there's that one.
Yeah. So like a black L on the roof, well, black 2 wings.
Runway 10 out from Alpha, clear takeoff 27.
Does it make you want to come back for homecoming?
Yankee Tower and Alpha Line.
Oh my god, yeah, I've never done the homecoming.
I think I did it once. I think I did the 5 year.
South Juliet Oscar Tango, Leningrad, taxi via runway 15, Alpha Apron 3.
Bill, you did that too, right? The 5 year?
No, I didn't.
Huh.
Lima Romeo Yankee.
Oh, there's a lot of buildings.
With 3006 from Alpha, clear takeoff.
Are you nervous? Is it making you nervous?
No, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll be fine. I'm sure the door is closed. The tricky door, I'm sure it's closed. Audio on? Are they capturing this?
Yes.
Oh, this is going to ruin my political
Charlie
career.
Foxtrot, Whiskey, Lana Tower. The other aircraft is done their city turnout. If you'd like to descend to 2000.
What's the old Ivy though?
That's all right with me.
Alright, thanks. We're okay at 3,000 actually. Thanks. We're going to head west now.
All the way to an island. No, didn't you?
Bahamas. Yeah, we went there early May. It's awesome. It was a lot of fun. Learned a lot about flying, and it convinced me I really need to get my instrument rating. It's when you're flying visual, you have to maintain clearance from the clouds, right? Which I didn't realize before I started flying, like just how often clouds are hovering at 2, 3, 4,000 feet above the ground. Visual rated pilots wandering into a cloud is a huge cause of accidents. I think it's the American version of the National Pilots Association. It's called AOPA. They've done studies. I think it's them. And say basically, if you are a visual pilot and you fly into instrument conditions, meaning whiteout like you're in a cloud, you have 178 seconds to live. That's what they say.
170. By cloud, you mean like very overcast? Oh, overcast. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. You cannot see the ground, cannot see the horizon, cannot see the sky.
Why would you have so few seconds? Like, you already have a way of measuring how high you are. Like,
people who are not trained to fly just on the instruments,
right.
When you're flying, you cannot rely on your bodily sensations to tell you whether you're flying straight and level or turning or descending or climbing. You just can't. Okay. And that's what happened to JFK Jr., right? He was visually rated, and he went and he flew and he got into instrument conditions at night, and there were a bunch of other stupid things he did too. I'm going to go around this cloud. And he just didn't realize that he had put the plane into a spiraling dive. And he ended up plummeting right into the ocean. So, it doesn't take a lot of training to be able to be ready for that. You just gotta trust your instruments, right? So like, if we flew into the cloud right now, I would basically stop looking outside at all, and I would just look to see, am I straight and level? Am I climbing? What's my turn like? What's my altitude? And I would just keep going back and forth. And I would maintain that heading, and then I would turn around and get us the hell out of the cloud. And autopilot helps, right? Because it keeps me straight and level, and I can just tell it to turn. So I don't even have to worry about it.
Okay. Seems weird. It still seems weird to me that clouds can be such a big danger with all the instrumentation and autopilot.
Yeah. It's just pilots who aren't trained, as I said, they just don't, they either don't trust their instruments or they don't think to rely on their instruments. They keep trying to fly visually.
Bunch of
what?
A bunch of windmills coming up.
Oh yeah. Might get a little choppy above the windmills. Just a heads up. We're high enough that it shouldn't matter, but...
The windmills cause choppiness, or are you just assuming it's windy because there's windmills there? Alright.
Yeah, actually. Increase a little of the turbulence coming up from the ground.
Oh, besides giving people cancer, that's another reason we should.
That's right. On the plus side, they help you pick up the transmissions from the UFOs.
Perfect. Have birds ever posed a problem for you yet?
Nothing significant. I've seen a couple go by every now and then, closer than I would like to see. But that means like a few 100 feet away.
Have you heard about the birds aren't real conspiracy theory?
Mostly
a joke, so it's for a guy to show how easy conspiracy theories are supposed to be to spread. But his conspiracy theory is that the government killed all birds in 1950 and replaced them with drones. So whenever you see a bird, it's watching you, and when it lands on an electrical line, it's getting repowered.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it. It's that little detail of when they land the power lines. That makes it believable.
That's them recharging. And yeah, it's really gone well. He sells t-shirts now that say birds aren't real.
Nice. Alright, gonna start descending. Slowly. There's the airport.
Have to meditate, Brian.
I'm sure this won't be bumpy.
I should warn you, my landings are not very good these days for some reason. I don't seem to be as I used to be.
I really wish you had mentioned that before we took off.
Golf Papa Oscar Tower, exit Foxtrot, contact ground 1217. Golf Papa Oscar. Golf Charlie Foxtrot, Whiskey Tower, number 1, continue ahead, traffic on the runway.
Number 1, Charlie Foxtrot Whiskey. Stupid birds.
After 2 hours of flying and trying to make sure my passengers felt comfortable, we were finally landing in Windsor, where I could relax and enjoy the rest of the day.
Not the best landing, but not too bad.
Good to me.
Like Brian loved the damn birds. Just
that was for his benefit.
That is what gave me the extra boost of confidence. So far, so good.
RV formation, go 121.7 and check in. RV2.
Windsor is a small city just across the river from Detroit, and is known for 3 things: the busiest crossing between Canada and the US, Caesar's Casino, and the Hiram Walker Whiskey Distillery, which was our main destination for a tour. Walker is the oldest and largest distillery in the country, and it really took off during Prohibition in the US, when Al Capone and other gangsters used to smuggle booze across the Detroit River into the US. Let's jump into the tour at the part where the guide is showing us how the mash is made.
That's rye, full of brine coke. Very common to do that, brine coke, that's what we call it. The reality is most Canadian whiskey is made from corn. Corn is the number 1 grain we use for fermentation and distillation. Alright, so as I open this, it might be under quite a bit of pressure. Might do a lot of hissing. There'll be some, looks like it's smoke or gas coming out of there. That's not poisonous, it is CO2 gas, one of the byproducts of fermentation. But what I would just stay back for a few minutes before you come up, because I really don't want you breathing that CO2 gas. You get it in your lungs, you cough a lot. It takes away the oxygen, it's harder to breathe. So it's very irritating. But just take about a minute or so, and it'll be clear. So just give me a chance to open this up. Yeah, that's nice CO2 gas. I want to put a couple of, give everyone a chance to come and have a look inside. So when you get a look inside here, you're going to see the surface of that mash, that fermentation, and it's going to look like it's boiling. There's all this bubbling, really violent bubbling, boiling coming to the surface. But really what that is just CO2 gas coming to the surface. In fact, the temperature of that mash can never get above 32 degrees Celsius. At 32 degrees Celsius, the computer senses a problem and probably something alarms, because at that point in time, yeast will die if it gets that warm. And if yeast dies, fermentation will stop. Ideally, if we keep that temperature around 27 degrees Celsius, it promotes these nice fruity and floral flavors. Those are flavors that we can carry through into our whiskey. So we've got the grain flavors, and in here we can create those nice fruity and floral flavors. Very important part of whiskey. We'll keep control of that temperature, keep it around 27, and we'll have those beautiful flavors that we're looking for.
After the mash is ready, the distillation process can begin. We got to see a real mix of stills that have been used over time at Walker's, starting with the old copper stills, some of which are no longer in use, but are kept around as historical relics. Depending on the type of whiskey being made, sometimes a steel still will be used instead of copper, like for their popular Lot 40 whiskey. Being so close to Detroit, the car culture in Windsor is really strong, and there happened to be a Corvette meet going on. We got to see some pretty cool Vettes, both vintage and new. The next day we headed back to the Windsor airport, and then we promptly sat around for hours waiting for the weather to clear up. Luckily, Windsor happens to be home to a historical aircraft museum, and although it wasn't open, we got to see some cool planes sitting outside, including this old T-33 trainer from the 1950s. That is funny with the fake still. We finally got airborne and we did a quick tour of Detroit before heading home. Neil did his undergrad in automotive engineering in Flint, and he's a wealth of information about the Motor City.
Want some more car information you don't really want, Brian?
Sure.
So to the south of the downriver of the tower over there, that's the River Rouge plant, which was Ford, and that was the place where he could do everything to make a car. He had his own steel plant, had his own rubber plant, not his rubber plant, but he owned plantations and he made the tires. So all raw materials could go into the River Rouge plant and cars would come out the other end.
The flight home was pretty uneventful, but Neil was sitting up front this time, and he was curious about everything to do with the plane. It was kind of a nice change after most passengers who seemed to just sit there quietly, hoping not to crash.
So what's that gauge? I would have said it was a compass, but...
This?
Yeah. Clearly it has compass marks on it.
Yep. It is called a horizontal situation indicator. So this is just a straight magnetic compass.
Yep.
This is gyroscopic. Right?
Okay.
So it does precess over time, so I need to every 10-15 minutes make sure they're lined up, and right now it kind of looks like they might not be... they're close enough.
So did that have anything to do with the turn we just did?
Yes, so this is actually used for navigation, and you see that how it's kind of split that yellow line, right? So that middle one's kind of shaking. So that tells me what track I want to follow, what path I want to follow, and if I was, let's say I was like a mile that way, this line would move to the left to say you need to go left, right? And then
so
orange.
The greenish yellow arrow would still be pointing up because you're going the right way, but it would be off to the side.
Exactly.
We're running parallel to the planned course.
Yep. And so this is sending the signal to it to say this is the direction you're supposed to be following. But right now, because there's a waypoint I use that this thing doesn't seem to know about, it's not actually sending any information here. So I'm just using it as a as a memory aid for me. That's the path I want to follow.
Yep.
The orange arrow actually tells the autopilot where to fly, which direction to point.
Alright.
Yep.
So all controls are fully manual, cable actuated, but there's servos on them for the autopilot.
Exactly. Yep.
Make sense, Brian?
Uh-huh. Oh, I would make it.
Another hour and a half later, and we were landing back at Oshawa after a great overnight trip. Hopefully it won't be too long before I get to do some more of these, because I really enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one, and in the meantime, fly safe.